This is part 3 of motor grater operation. In this program, we'll look at operating techniques in actual work situations. But first, let's go over 6 basic steps of motor grater operation. Steps that you'll follow on just about all grading jobs. Step number 1, study the area. Picture in your mind what needs to be done on the first pass and the following passes. It's even a good idea to get out and walk the job before you begin working. Look for washouts, holes, and anything else that could interfere with the operation. And note the location of underground utilities or low-hanging tree limbs and power lines. Okay, step number 2, position the grater. Exactly how you line up the grater depends on the job, but most often you'll put the grater directly in front of the work or just off to the side. Now the third step, set the blade. Adjust the height, angle, and pitch of the mold board. And if necessary, side shift the blade or circle so you can reach the work area more easily. The fourth step, select a transmission gear that will carry you through the pass without lugging or overloading the engine. Use a low gear for harder cuts and heavy material, and use a higher gear for lighter loads. All right, the fifth step. Drive straight ahead using front wheel lean, frame steering, or both to keep the grater from side drifting. And finally, the sixth step. Once you get going, make as few changes on the blade setting as possible. Constantly adjusting the blade on a working pass will make your cuts uneven. Try to get it right the first time. So for most operations, first, look at the work ahead. Second, position the grater in front of the work or off to the side. Third, adjust the blade. Fourth, select a transmission gear suitable for the job. Fifth, drive ahead using wheel lean or frame steering to keep the grater going straight. And sixth, once you get going, make as few changes on the blade as possible. All of these steps will become second nature to you as you gain more experience on the grater. There is one more point I want to mention. Use your seat belt. Nothing adds more to your safety than the few seconds it takes to buckle up. Okay, now let's take a look at using the grater on some common maintenance operations. Grading shoulders, blade mixing asphalt, laying cold mix asphalt, and pulling ditches. We'll start with grading shoulders. Here's how you want to end up. A smooth shoulder flush with the edge of the pavement and sloped away from the road so water can run off easily. To do all that, you have to make 2 passes. On the first pass, you want to pull material from the outside edge of the shoulder and windrow it up to the edge of the road. That requires a fairly sharp blade angle, about 45 degrees, with the toe of the blade set on the outside edge of the shoulder and the heel set near the edge of the pavement. The idea on the first pass is to maintain the original slope of the shoulder while cutting into the surface just enough to remove ruts and vegetation. Slight downward pressure on the blade is usually enough. And notice the wheel lean in the direction he's moving material. That helps keep the grater going in a straight line. Now for the second pass. You have to pick up the windrow and spread it back across the shoulder. That means changing the blade angle. You still need an angle of 45 degrees or so, but now you want the toe of the blade set at the edge of the pavement. And because you want to spread the material, keep the heel of the blade loose so it won't leave a windrow at the bottom of the shoulder. The important thing on the second pass is to make the shoulder flush with the edge of the road. There shouldn't be any drop-off. To do that, you may have to set the blade a couple of inches over the pavement. But be careful. Don't put so much downward pressure on the blade that it digs into the road. Keep your speed up and the mold board pitched forward. That helps roll, mix, and compact the material. When you're done with the second pass, ride over the shoulder a few times to compact it with the grater's tires. If the shoulder is badly eroded, it may have to be rebuilt. That involves hauling in new material, dumping it, and then spreading it with the grater. When rebuilding shoulders, it may be necessary to break up the old surface with a scarifying attachment mounted on the grater. Scarifying the surface will help the new material mix and bind with the old material when it's dumped and spread on the shoulder. From then on, the operation is about the same. Using the grater to spread the material back across the shoulder to maintain the original slope. Okay, now the techniques for blade mixing asphalt. On this particular job, 2 graters were used, but it can be done with only one. The idea is to take aggregate from the windrow on the right and spread it across the mixing pad in 1 to 2 inch layers. Then apply liquid asphalt to each layer. Next, mix each layer of aggregate and asphalt and windrow it to the other side of the pad. Finally, work the windrowed material back and forth until it's uniformly mixed. Let's see how it's done. For the first spreading pass, line the grater up next to the aggregate windrow. Set the blade angle at about 20 degrees, just enough to pull material from the windrow and spread it across the mixing pad. And use a loose blade so the material will spread in thin layers without leaving a windrow on the other side. When you get started, try to keep the grater going in a straight line. If your path isn't straight, the amount of material you pull from the windrow will vary down the line, and that will result in a non-uniform mix. After the first spreading pass, an asphalt distributor applies liquid asphalt to the first layer of aggregate. The next step is to mix the first layer and windrow it to the other side of the pad. To do that, you need to use a sharper blade angle, about 45 degrees. Remember, a sharper angle windrows rather than spreads material. And you need to use a tighter blade, tight enough to pick up the first layer. Keep the blade pitched forward. That helps roll and mix the material as it's carried across the mold board. After the first spreading and mixing passes, you start the whole process over again. First, taking aggregate from the windrow and spreading it across the pad. Then applying the asphalt and mixing and windrowing each layer. The number of spreading and mixing passes you make depends on the size of the aggregate windrow. Eventually, you'll have spread all the aggregate, mixed it, and placed it on the other side of the pad. But as you can see, you're not done yet. Now's when the real mixing begins. It's really just a matter of working the material back and forth until you get a uniform mix. On these passes, take only as much material as the grater can handle without lugging or overloading the engine. Use a transmission gear that will take you all the way through each pass without having to shift gears or change your cut. A gear in the low range will work best. Use front wheel lean to help you keep the grater going in a straight line. And keep the blade pitched forward to give the material a rolling, mixing action. Believe it or not, it may take days of working the material back and forth to get a quality mix. But here's what you want to end up with. An even windrow of cold mix asphalt, uniformly mixed and ready for use. One more point. As you've seen, blade mixing asphalt is a dirty job. Once you're done with the grater, take some time to clean it up. The sooner you do it, the easier it'll be. The next operation we'll look at is laying cold mix asphalt. This operation requires a good eye and a soft touch on the controls. Generally, the objective is to fill in ruts and depressions that have formed on the old surface and restore the road to its original shape. On the first couple of passes, angle the blade about 20 degrees with the toe set flush to the surface and the heel set slightly higher. That will pull the mix toward the center of the patch. And use a forward blade pitch to help roll and compact the mix as it comes off the mold board. For the finishing passes, use a flatter blade angle, almost straight across the grater frame. Set the height of both ends of the blade to match the shape of the road. If there is a super elevation or crown, you have to maintain that shape. Pay special attention to the edges of the patch. Feather the edges to get them even with the surrounding surface. If the edges aren't flush, you'll end up turning a dip in the road into a bump in the road. Even though the patch will be compacted with a roller when you're done, you should still try to leave the patch as smooth as possible. Avoid changing the blade setting or shifting gears during a pass. That could roughen up the surface and interfere with getting a good final compaction. Okay, now pulling ditches. This is how you should end up. A V-shaped ditch with a well-groomed foreslope and backslope. Whether you're digging a new ditch or reshaping an old one, the objective is the same: to improve drainage from the road and shoulder. On this job, the operator has to reshape an existing ditch. To do it, he sets the grater on the foreslope and angles the blade at about 45 degrees. The toe of the blade is set at the bottom of the ditch, just behind the front wheel. The idea is to pull material from the bottom of the ditch, spread it up the foreslope, and leave a windrow at the edge of the road shoulder. Use front wheel lean to keep the grater going in a straight line. Remember to lean the wheels away from the ditch and toward the side you're moving the material. After you pull the ditch, position the grater for bank sloping. Set the heel of the blade at the bottom of the ditch and the toe of the blade on the back slope. And again, use a blade angle of about 45 degrees. In back sloping, you're interested in reshaping the slope. It requires a tight blade pitched upright or slightly back. Generally, you're moving a lot of material, so be careful where you place the windrow. If you're working with an articulated grater, you can usually place the windrow outside the rear tires and at the bottom of the ditch. But on a rigid frame grater, you'll have to side shift the circle to reach the back slope. That means leaving the windrow inside the rear tires. When you're done with the bank, you'll have a smooth back slope and all the material will be at the bottom of the ditch. So what's the next step? You guessed it. Pull the ditch. Move the material out of the ditch and windrow it to the shoulder. After that, it's a matter of spreading the windrowed material to get a smooth foreslope flush to the outside edge of the shoulder. And that's it. You end up with a clean ditch and reshaped slopes, ready for reseeding. Now a couple of points about working slopes. Any slope. Anytime you work on a slope, there's a danger of rolling the grater. So keep the blade extended on the downhill side. The blade will help keep you from rolling over. And try to keep a full load of material on the blade. That way, if there's a washout ahead, the blade can fill it up before you ride over it with the rear wheels. A motor grater can be used on many more field operations than the ones we've seen here, but every operation involves some of the basic techniques we've covered. What you need now is a lot of hands-on practice. We've given you the basics in this program, but skill in operating the grater comes only from practice, practice, and more practice. And then one day, you can become one of the few, an equipment operator who can handle a motor grater.
Another job well done, son.
Many of our state and county roads are unpaved aggregate surfaces, and because they are usually low-volume roads, the cost of paving probably exceeds any benefits that would be gained through an expensive paving operation. But many rural residents rely on these roads for access to work, school, and market. The roads may be unpaved, but they are not unimportant. Maintaining the hundreds of miles of our unpaved roads requires an almost constant effort. The fact is, in time, weather and traffic will make any unpaved road virtually impassable if it's not maintained regularly and correctly. The motor grater is a machine especially suited for this type of road maintenance. With its long wheelbase and its adjustable blade, the grater can easily span badly eroded sections and quickly restore the surface to its original shape. But of course, it's the grater operator who really gets the job done. He's the one who is responsible for keeping his stretch of road in good condition. This program, Blading Unpaved Roads, will demonstrate the basics of the operation. And it's going to be basic. There are just too many different circumstances and situations to cover every detail here. So let me make one suggestion. Read this book, Blading Aggregate Surfaces. It was put together by a panel of highway engineers, and it describes and explains nearly all aspects of this operation. Read it and carry it along with you out on the job. Okay, let's get started. The first part of the operation begins in the yard, checking out the grader. Make sure it's in good shape, properly serviced, and equipped to do the job. That means checking your fluid levels, air filters, belts, hoses, wiring, and so on. If you find something wrong, either fix it yourself or let your supervisor know about it. Then there's lubrication. The grader often